Most men can still picture the moment if they stop and think about it for a second. An old car sitting in a driveway, maybe on gravel beside the house. Faded paint, a dent somewhere on the fender, a bench seat that had seen better days. Maybe a little rust starting around the wheel well. It wasn't perfect, not even close. But standing there beside that car, heart beating a little faster than usual, you knew something important was about to happen. And then your dad reached into his pocket, pulled out a small set of keys, and dropped them into your hand. In that moment, that old car wasn't just metal and rubber anymore. It was freedom. For young men growing up in America in the late 1960s and 1970s, getting your first car felt like the moment the world suddenly opened up. Back then, towns were smaller. Main Street still had the hardware store, the diner, the barber shop, and the local gas station where the same mechanic worked on half the cars in town. And if you were a teenager in those years, there was one thing almost everyone dreamed about. Not a phone, not a computer, a car. Because a car meant independence. It meant you didn't have to ask your parents for a ride anymore. It meant you could drive wherever the road went, even if that road was just a slow cruise past the same storefronts on a warm Friday night with the windows rolled down and the radio playing softly through the dash speaker. Most first cars didn't come from shiny dealership lots either. They came from ordinary places. A neighbor down the street who had something sitting behind the garage. A classified ad buried in the back pages of the local newspaper. A car that had been parked beside a barn for years. Sometimes your father would hear about one through a friend at work, and one evening he'd say the words every teenager hoped to hear. "There's an old Chevy down the road. Might be worth a look." And suddenly your heart would start beating faster. Because sitting in that driveway might be the car that would become yours. Maybe it was a Chevy Nova. Maybe a Dodge Dart. Maybe a Ford Maverick. Maybe an old pickup truck with faded paint and a long bench seat that slid a little when you took corners. You'd walk around it trying to look calm, kicking the tire, leaning over the engine like you knew what you were doing. But inside you were already imagining what it would feel like driving it down the road for the first time. Most of those cars didn't cost much either. $200, maybe $300 if it ran well. But when you were 17 years old, that might as well have been a fortune. So you worked for it, pumping gas at the local station, stacking groceries at the market, mowing lawns under the July sun, hauling hay, fixing fences, taking any job that paid a few dollars. Every paycheck went into a small pile of savings. Dollar by dollar you got closer. And when the day finally came to hand over that money, something inside you shifted. You weren't just buying a car. You were buying your first real piece of independence. Of course, most first cars came with problems, sometimes a lot of problems. The starter might stick on cold mornings. The carburetor might cough and sputter when you hit the gas. Maybe the radiator leaked just a little onto the driveway. But back then, that was normal. It just meant time in the garage, the hood open, tools scattered across the workbench, your father leaning over the engine saying something simple like, "Hand me that wrench." Those evenings were quiet lessons. You learned how to check the oil, how to change a spark plug, how to tighten a loose belt. You learned how an engine sounded when it was running right, and how it sounded when something wasn't quite right yet. And those moments, standing beside your dad with the smell of motor oil and warm metal in the air, stayed with a lot of men for the rest of their lives. Then came the moment you had been waiting for. The first drive alone. No parents in the passenger seat, no one telling you when to brake or when to turn. Just you, the road, and the low rumble of that engine. Maybe you rolled the windows down and the warm evening air rushed through the cabin. Maybe the AM radio crackled with a song drifting in and out as you drove past the edge of town. Suddenly, those same roads you'd seen your whole life felt completely different. Because now you could go anywhere, even if anywhere was just 10 miles down the highway and back again. Before long, that car became the center of everything. Friends piling into the back seat, someone yelling, "Shotgun!" for the front seat, somebody else turning up the radio until the music rattled through the dashboard speaker. Gas was cheap enough that a few dollars would keep the tank going for the night. You'd pull into the local station, smell the gasoline in the air, and watch the numbers spin on the pump as it filled up. Then the night would usually start the same way. A slow drive down Main Street, cars passing in both directions, everyone checking out everyone else's ride. Maybe someone revved their engine at a stoplight. Maybe someone leaned out a window to wave at friends. Sometimes you ended up parked in the high school lot with a row of other cars, everyone leaning against the hoods talking about engines, music, and where the night might go next. For many young men, that first car also meant something else, the first real date. You'd spend half the afternoon getting the car ready, wiping dust off the dashboard, clearing old soda bottles out of the back seat, maybe even running it through the gas station wash if you had a few extra coins. Then you'd pull up outside her house, trying to look calm while your heart was racing. Maybe you drove to the drive-in theater, maybe the diner for burgers and milkshakes, maybe just out along a quiet country road with the headlights stretching across the pavement ahead. Somehow that old car, with its worn seats and rattling doors, suddenly felt like the most important place in the world. Of course, first cars had a habit of breaking down, too. Flat tires on the side of the road, engines overheating on hot summer afternoons, a battery dying in the middle of nowhere. But strangely enough, those moments became some of the best stories later on. Friends pushing the car while you steered, borrowing jumper cables from a stranger at a gas station, standing under a streetlight with the hood open trying to figure out what went wrong. Back then, you didn't panic. You just worked the problem. And somehow you always managed to get it running again and make it home. Years passed. Cars came and went. Some were faster, some were newer, some had smooth paint and quiet engines, and everything worked the way it was supposed to. But for a lot of men, none of them ever meant quite as much as that very first one. Because that first car wasn't really about the machine itself. It was about the moment in life it represented, the moment when the world suddenly felt wide open, when you could drive down a quiet road at sunset with the windows down, the warm air moving through the car, and the radio playing softly while the future stretched out somewhere ahead of you. And even now, after all these years, most men can still remember it clearly. The color of that first car, the sound of the engine when it started, the way the bench seat felt under your hands as you slid across it, the smell of gasoline at the pump on a summer night, the feeling of those keys resting in your palm for the very first time. And chances are, if you close your eyes for just a moment, you can still see that car sitting there in that driveway, waiting for the road ahead.